Japan. So.
Yeah, right.
Well, so your questions,
Yes.
I think this time are really good ones.
Thank you. Sorry, I got my cafetiere of
Oh,
Ticino
go ahead. Go
ready,
ahead.
ready to go. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah, my questions are good ones. Even
Yeah.
even if one of them is kind of might be out of the realm of what a bamboo can actually, you know, get their head round. The aspect of temporal cosmology.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's a great question.
Yeah.
So maybe to begin, do you want to kind of go a little bit deeper, like maybe sort of flesh out your question, or which one
Yeah.
would you like to start with, and then just sort of explain the background of why that is, a question that you want to.
So
and
which
maybe
one?
tell me a
Borderlands
little
or
bit
or
about
the
what you
temporal?
know about the question, or about the background to the question as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. So shall we start with the Borderlands stuff or the temporal cosmology stuff?
It's
Or?
up to you. Either one is fine. I think is great. So
Okay,
which one
probably
is
the
more?
probably the temporal cosmology is the pressing one, but the other
Okay,
one's
then let's go
pretty
for that
important
one.
for other
Sure.
reasons. But, okay, so the temporal cosmology, what I kind of know of, Buddhist cosmology, I wouldn't be able to rattle off all the names of all the different kalpas and the approximate even time period in the symbolic way that they're described, but I know in Buddhist cosmology, it's a very long, temporal cosmology is a very long time. It's a very expansive, and then like all things Buddhist, they also bring it down to like the most minutest, nanosecond of what's happening in our lives. But anyway, so
Right.
the temporal cosmology thing is that there's these very vast periods when sort of the cycles that samsara goes through, on a very vast level where it comes into exist, what we think of as the kind of worlds or realms of existence start to come into existence from the very highest, and then it gets down to the lowest, and then that exists for a time, and there's these four like broad periods, like once it's all like, so there's those massively long periods where that comes into existence, and then there's this cycle of, while it's in existence, this is what's happening, and it's these four massively long kalpas of different developments of things, and then within each of those kalpas there's kind of this cycle of kalpas of sort of declining and ascending kalpas. And we're kind of, from what I understand, in my limited way, is that we're kind of in a declining kalpa. We've been in a declining kalpa for a very long time in our part of samsara, wherever that is. And Shakyamuni kind of came toward at a pretty low point as it is in our kalpa. And gave the Dharma, and then there's these three periods of Dharma from when he, his parinirvana, his so-called parinirvana, is the kabuki theater that Nirmanakaya Buddhas go through to die, and anyway, so for expedient means for us all, but so then there's the three periods of that are, and I've heard different time periods for those. Some say 500 years for one of them, and then the others are, the next one is 1,000 years, and then the last one is 10,000 years, and I've heard 1,000 years for each. Really, the last one is really 10,000 years, but the 1,000 years in the beginning, there's certain things about it, or the first five, whatever it is. So, to me, when I listen specifically to Jodo Shinshu teachings, the Jodo Shinshu masters, and what they've said, specifically Shinran, at one point says, we are now in the fifth 500-year period since Shakyamuni's passing. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
There's no mistaking that. Yeah.
Right.
So, and the traditional belief was that it was about, not what was it? That Shakyamuni lived around the traditional belief was about 900 BC, BCE,
Mm.
I think was always the traditional belief. And that's kind of what, and then later on through, whatever anthropological or archaeological, or what, how much I trust all of that at this point, but it was determined that it's probably closer to 500.
Right. Yeah.
BCE. Yeah. So Shinran saying that we're now in the fifth 500-year period would be wrong if that were the case. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, so from a historical
anyway, to be so that has caused me to, even because I'm already, I'm suspicious of so-called, what we think of as history and what we think of as alleged, prehistory and how long the earth has existed. All of that stuff I actually don't think we have right anyway. I think it probably was much longer, but anyway, so there's this part of me that's like, well, what if that is right? What if it is right that he was born and probably his Paragana was around 500 years BCE? What happens if Shinran got that wrong? Do you know what I mean? Or if other Dharma masters got that wrong, or all these Dharma masters, other schools of Buddhism and just Buddhism in general got that wrong. Do you see what I mean?
Then what else did they got wrong? Exactly. Is that what you're saying?
And that's what it encapsulates in,
Yeah.
Now, that question isn't as strong as it used to be in me, because since that question first occurred to me, probably 10 or 11 years ago, my trust in the so-called anthropological, archaeological worldview, and scientific worldview has greatly waned. Do you know what I mean? Over the past decade, quite a bit. So it's not as strong a question, but it's still kind of there. It's really always in the back of my mind, looming, lurking, and that's not just for Shinran. There's other Dharma masters that have said similar, have pinpointed a time of whichever era they were in. And so, oh no, this is who I look at as, these are like the Dharma masters of whatever school. And if they got that wrong, what does that, so
what does that mean?
Still there, still lurking. It's still,
still sort of a doubt, you could call it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's a great question. And I actually used to have the exact same question because, when I read Shinran's writings, he does mention we're now in just as you said, we're in the fifth 500-year period since the passing of Shakyamuni. And of course, the consensus in Buddhist, in Buddhist thought is that Shakyamuni passed away or entered, great nirvana sometime around 500 BC, more or less. Some say 498 or something like that. But, it's close to 500, right? And I think the vast majority of sources support that. So there is a lot of when historians or scholars of Buddhism are coming up with these dates, it's very specific date, right? So you ask, well, how did they come up with that? And they're looking at a lot of the sources in the Southern tradition. So Theravada Buddhism. They're also looking at there wasn't, just Theravada Buddhism, right? Theravada. We sometimes hear, Theravada equals Hinayana, or what's now we usually call Nikaya Buddhism, right? But there were many different.
So Hinayana, Nikaya Buddhism, what is that referring to?
Well, Nikaya Buddhism is referring to the Nikayas, or the Agamas, or basically the scriptures of early Buddhism. In Chinese, I think they're called the Agongkyo, or in Japanese it's the Agongkyo, right? So basically the Pali canon, but it wasn't just in Pali, of course. It was written other, variations of early Prakrits, I think they were called, languages of Buddhism, right? And then the Hinayana canon, of course, was written in Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, it's called, which is a more, how to put it? A much more eloquent version, or scholarly version of Sanskrit, right? But there's a great book about all of this too. I should recommend it to you, and it's called I think it's called A History of Early Buddhism, and it goes it's the entire history of early Buddhism up till the beginning of the Mahayana period. And the scholar is a Japanese scholar at University of Tokyo, I believe. And he really goes into, it's a great read. He talks about the context, all the historical aspects. Very easy to read, even though it's a scholarly work. He actually wrote the book as a sort of an easy to understand digest of the scholarly literature, in Buddhist studies for his students. It's like the Cliff's Notes version. But it's a great book. I will send you the link, and because highly recommend it. There is a PDF of it, I think, too. And he talks about the dating and all of that stuff too, and it is very thorough. I mean, there's a good reason why we have reason to believe that Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, right, lived at the time that we believe he did, which would be around 500 BCE, or 600 to 500 BCE, right? And now that doesn't mean that it's an absolute fact. They actually found there was an archaeological discovery, I think, that indicated that the Bodh Gaya, the temple that was built after on this place where Shakyamuni attained enlightenment, actually may have existed earlier than was previously thought. So that kind of led some people to think, well, maybe we should push back the date, the dates of Shakyamuni a little earlier. But I haven't really heard anything about that discovery since. I don't know what the impact of it was on. I don't know if it's enough to move the needle of, the consensus of where, right. And also, this is something I have to check, but I don't know if the so you mentioned the traditional dates of Shakyamuni. So when Shakyamuni was believed to have entered nirvana,
and what it looks like from what Dharma masters say and things, what what I mean,
right?
It was just sort of it was believed it was about around that sort of time period. And my eventual way that I somewhat kind of resolved the doubt was to say, well, who am I going to trust here in Mapo?
Yeah.
Am I going to trust Dharma masters, or am I going to trust, sociological, anthropological, surely scholars and surely intellectual people that are far more, far more intelligent, far more, perceptive, far more, and skilled, and do you know what I mean, than me, but they're not Dharma masters. They're not.
Yes, although many of them
so who am
are
I going to trust
Buddhists.
more? So I would say, well, some of them are. Yeah, some are Buddhist. Yeah, that's true. Some, I guess, yeah. But who am I going to trust? You know what I mean? That's what it kind of comes down to. Am I going to trust the consensus of basically social scientists, or am I going to trust the consensus of Dharma masters? Do you know what I mean? That's kind of what it comes down to me is, and I err on the side of Dharma masters. Do you know what I mean? Since I'm living in Mapo,
right,
there's not much you can trust anyway. And even though these people may be very respected and scholarly, and do you know what I mean? That's kind of where I head with it. I wish I could go a different way than that.
Yeah, I think maybe you should consider another approach or another way. And I have a suggestion for you. So I'm going to kind of share with you the way that I sort of make sense of this, right? Contradiction, you could call it, right?
Anyway, but I'm just making that point really quick. Continue with what you're saying, and yeah, we'll definitely discuss that.
Yeah. Well, it ties in because well, one thing you should consider is the people who have sort of the consensus on Buddhist dates and history is not just like a small group of secular people. It's a wide. I mean, we're talking scholars from Southern Buddhism, Theravada. We're talking Tibetan Buddhism is huge. I mean, that's a huge part of contemporary Buddhist studies. Japanese Buddhism with multiple schools. And I would say the vast majority of Buddhist scholars are actually practicing Buddhists, probably. I mean, there are, some, of course, Buddhist scholars who are secular or not, practicing. But
that's good to be reminded of that, because in my mind, I don't think of it that way,
okay.
So that's good to actually bring that's a very good point, actually, that it's actually not just secular scholars. There's an awful lot of Buddhist scholarship involved here, if not the majority, like you say. But anyway.
Right. And also, like, even Thai, I think the Thai Buddhist calendar, right, starts at the accepted date, which would be 500 BCE, I believe. So it's pretty. I mean, you can always make a case for, well, what if maybe it's some other date? But from what we know of the historical record, and in fact, it was most likely 500 BC when the Buddha, entered great Mahaparinirvana, right? So that's the historical fact, let's call it, right? So where does that leave your doubt about the Dharma masters, and specifically about Shinran, who very, very specifically chooses this very old date for Shakyamuni, and it's not like a couple hundred years earlier. It's a whole 1,000 years before we believe, or would it be 500 years? I think.
Right. So
right.
What do you mean that?
Earlier than the accepted date.
Oh yeah,
so I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because Shinran was writing in the 12th century, right? Or the 12th, 13th century.
Exactly.
Now, so I also had this question. I thought, what does this mean? And I think the answer is pretty straightforward. And the answer is that Shinron had you could say, a religious interest, right? Based on the goal, why he was writing Kyogyo Shinsho and so on, which was to defend his Dharma master's teaching, Honen Shonin's school, against, other people who were criticizing it. And of course, he was also writing to encourage people to believe in what Honen Shonin had taught, right? So when you think about that, it makes sense that he would want to try to prove that we are now well into Mappo, he has an interest in kind of showing that to the best that he can, right? And I think that's why, he chose those sources and those particular passages that put a very kind of an early date on the start of Mappo, because consequently, a much older date for Shakyamuni's birth and death. That's basically because he wanted to show that, we are now, we're in deep Mappo, right? It's what was his.
Yeah, it's very good. We are in deep Mappo.
We're in deep Mappo.
Mappo has hit the fan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So when you look at, older Buddhist texts and scriptures and so on, I mean, you're going to find some points where it might not, perfectly match up with, whatever the historical date is or anything like that, right? There's always going to be some element of that. But when we come to Shinron, right, Shinron isn't writing a historical treatise. He's not, the intention of his writing is not to create a history. It's a religious message.
Yeah.
So when I look at it from that point of view, I don't find a problem really with the fact that he puts an earlier date than, and also, he was working with the sources that were available to him in that time and in that period, and I'm not an expert, so I don't know exactly how the history of the dating, the historical, of, the, what do you call it? The Buddhist historiography, how that developed and what was the consensus over time, There was sometimes a tendency, I think, possibly to make things more ancient than they actually were, because it kind of, in that ancient context, if you could prove that my guy was around long before your guy was around, you kind of had a...
Yeah, well, and that's another, beyond just Jodo Shinshu, we look at Buddhism in general, we look at what it says in the sutras about even the Buddhas of the sort of the five Buddhas of sort of Jambudvipa, kind of our part of samsara.
Yeah,
they existed a very long time ago. Do you know what I mean? Beyond, yes. way beyond just those five, beyond
right.
What science now says is the age of our particular corner of cosmology. Do you know what I mean? The age of our
and they were also incredibly tall and
yes,
right?
So you kind of, it's that whole line of like, okay, was that skill and means teaching? Do you know what I mean? Because there's some aspects you're like, well, I'm supposed to take this kind of literally, and then other times you're like, it's skill and you just have to go with that skill and means. So it's like, it's almost like well, then you pick and choose. And do you see what I mean? I have a real difficulty. That's another call that not necessarily just not just a doubt, but a kind of barrier.
Yeah.
In a kind of to that, you
Right.
know, well, it seems like, okay, well, so we're going to pick and choose when we decide whether something's skill and means or whether this is what we
Mm.
follow literally. Do you see what I mean? And it seems
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
for Jodo Shinshu, for me, for Jodo Shinshu to be, there is an awful lot of it that we really should take as the Dharma masters said it.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? There's, for it to actually have authority, you kind of have
Yeah.
to be literal. Otherwise, it's just a lot of the whole idea of Shinjin and
Mm.
Pure Land and wishing to go to Pure, you know, it all starts to kind of break down and become kind of murky. And do you know what I mean? And oh, Pure Land here and now, and do you know what I mean? All that kind of stuff. And you're
Yeah.
like, and I'm like, well, what's the point? Why am I even, you know, why am I even devoting so much time and effort to this if it's just like every other modernist,
Mm.
wishy-washy, watered down
Right.
belief system? You know what I mean?
I
Yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah,
I see your point.
yeah.
I think that, but we have to be
You're breaking up an awful lot there, Kyokan.
careful not to fall into snake. Is it okay now?
1 sec. Yeah,
Hello.
it's coming back. Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks
So
like my Wi-Fi may have dropped out a bit.
oh, okay. Cool. So you were saying it, we have to be careful to not, and that then it just kind of.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, we want to be careful not to fall into the same trap that the Protestant fundamentalists fell into,
Yeah.
which is looking at, in Buddhist terms, and Shinran also refers to this. It's like he says there's the four reliances. One of them we mentioned before, which is rely on the Dharma and not on the teachers of the Dharma.
Yeah.
Rely on the Dharma. But the second one, I believe, is rely on the meaning and not on the words.
Mm. Which pretty much every other Dharma teaches
it
that.
goes on to say this is a famous metaphor. Right. And it's a famous metaphor, right, of the finger pointing at the moon. So the words are intended to point us to the meaning, the truth, right, of so what fundamentalists end up doing is they end up staring at the finger, and having an overly literal obsession. I even, I was every once in a while I look at some biblical studies or stuff like that, and I saw there was somebody on a YouTube channel about Mid-Eastern mythology and religion and so on. Quoted, someone had written a comment and was presumably a fundamentalist Protestant wrote a comment, and they're talking about, traditionally Moses wrote the 5 books of Moses, right, the Pentateuch. But of course we now know that he didn't, right? Historically. But someone wrote a comment, well, if Moses didn't write those books, then what is the point of the Bible? And the person was like, you just, that doesn't follow from the fact that there's no historical. I mean, you can still, even if Moses didn't write the 5 books of Moses, if you are a Jew or a Christian, and you believe in those books, you can still find ways of getting spiritual meaning from those books. You don't have to you don't have to die on this hill, So we do want to be careful I think, especially as now going back to Buddhism, um, for us, we're kind of lucky because it's actually written in our, earliest texts, that the warning to not, to remember that the words are pointing us to the meaning. And what is the meaning? The meaning is soteriological. It's salvific. It's the truth that is intended to liberate us, right? To bring us to enlightenment. So it's not to bring us to a better understanding of history. Although that may well be a good goal. I mean, we may come to a better understanding of history through our study of Buddhism, right? We'll learn about Shinran Shonin and the people that he met, and the historical events of the Hongonji and Osaka. It's all really interesting, but the meaning that all of this is pointing us to is the truth of Amida, which is infinite, the light of wisdom and compassion, shining unhindered, in the power of the vow to save us, me, right? This is the truth that we're being pointed to. So we have to be careful not to get too fixated on the words. And the Nirvana Sutra, and Shinran quotes a lot from the Nirvana Sutra as well, talks about how I use these words that seem like they mean different things, and they all mean the same thing. They all have the same meaning. So actually, there's a lot of this in Buddhism, but Tathagata, which means the Buddha, which means Buddha nature, which means Shinran says that Buddha nature is Shinjin. So we have all of these words, and with our discriminating minds, as we are Bombu, we're unenlightened, we separate all of these things. The Tathagata's over here, and then there's Buddha natures over here, and then there's Shinjin, which I either do or don't have. We do all of this, but in the text itself, it's actually telling us, this all has the same meaning. The Buddha is not separate from the Buddha nature. The Buddha is the Buddha nature. The Buddha mind. So my only point would be, you don't want to be too, how to put it, too, well, going back to what you said about skillful means, how should we interpret, the somewhat legendary, for lack of a better term, account of these increasingly tall Buddhas in going back into the past. How do we make sense of all that? And now we know all this supposedly about how the universe is, and my only point would be, let's not be too unbending with how we interpret this stuff, because we don't want to fall into the trap of, if Moses didn't exist, what's the point of the Bible? The point in Buddhism, of course, the Bible is another story, but in Buddhism, the sutras, as we've discussed before, are the expression in language, which we can understand, of the truth, which can't be expressed in language. It's or is beyond the realm of language. So the sutras are the finger pointing us, because we read signs. We're language. We're beings who have to have language. In fact, they've in cases where children grow up isolated from human contact and don't have all of that, I think your mind like can't even develop. I mean, we are from the very earliest stage, we grow up with language, so
Oh, it
we're
alters.
interpreting
It
everything.
alters our brain chemistry
Yeah,
and everything. Yeah, and unit
exactly.
well, culture does that itself. Units of culture do that to us. Not just language. It's like, we're just like
Right.
cyborg, like cultural cyborgs or something. Programmed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
culture. Yeah, and culture is tied to language, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. It's all
culture develops
like
and then it's transmitted
language,
through language.
symbolism. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. And points for are the finger pointing us the truth, which is the moon in the analogy. So yeah, do we do a lot of textual analysis and we talk about words, especially when we're talking about Shinjin and all of this. We do use all these words. And they all have meaning. It's important. Like, you can't, if you are using the wrong words, then you could be pointing people in the wrong direction, right? Which is why Buddhists take the sutras very seriously. It is the word of the Buddha. It's the Buddha Vakana. It's called in Sanskrit. This is the words of the enlightened one. He knows what he's talking about, right? But that doesn't mean that we have to only interpret everything in one strict literal way. There's a difference, right? And in fact, Shinran himself, he interprets or rereads, reinterprets passages in the sutras, right? Mm-hmm. So most notably, the text of the original vow, in which, as it's written, if you're going to literally read the Chinese, it says that we direct merit to be born in the Pure Land, right? But then Shinran rereads that using the same Chinese characters. He's not changing the text. He's just reading it in a different way, to mean we receive the directing of virtue from Amida to be born in that land. So he actually switches the direction, right? And this is an example I'm bringing. This is like one of Shinran's pivotal insights, without which you can't really have Jodo Shinshu. And second, he's reading the text in a new way, in a way that hadn't been done before, to bring out this meaning, this religious meaning from the text. So yeah, my point would be, just let's not fall into the trap that fundamentalists do of having too rigid or too focused on the finger and not looking at the moon, right? And a good example, well, like the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, it was, people brought to his attention, well, what do we do with all of this, Buddhist cosmology, right? Which we've talked about before. And, we now have this scientific age, we have telescopes and we can see, how old the universe is and where it extends and all of this. And, apparently there isn't, a Mount Sumeru in a literal sense. Now, of course, people have tried to say, well, maybe it's the Milky Way or something like that, right? So what should we do about this? And the Dalai Lama, I believe, said, well, we don't have to hold on to this, traditional cosmology necessarily. Like if there's a new cosmology, then we can, um, adopt that. It doesn't have to be this. Which I see that point of view, right? I personally, though, think that we can kind of have both in a sense. So we can have the scientific, modern, that's all well and good. But then we can also keep the traditional cosmology, call it the Dharma cosmology. This is a cosmology of the Dharma, the world of the Dharma, right? And especially, I think in Tibetan Buddhism, it's more of a mental exercise in symbolism in the cosmologies of, um, now the only problem we encounter there, of course, is then people will say, well, does the Pure Land not really exist then? Right. And then we have to ask, in what way does the Pure Land exist? And this ties into your other question about the fulfilled land and the transformed lands pretty well, I think. But before we move on to that, I would like to ask, did anything that I said ring a bell, or do you have questions or doubt or maybe
it hasn't shifted
or
that much. It hasn't really. It's not. I don't think it's something that it's a one-time conversation. Definitely not.
Yeah.
Because there's part of me that still jumps to, well, there's other ways, even not necessarily. It's hard to say literal when you're talking about realms, because just by the virtue of Buddhist teaching, this isn't real. What we're experiencing is not real. It's a dream. So to be literal about trying to have a literal definition of a dreamscape is kind of silly,
Mm-hmm.
But there's part of me that jumps to, like, with the temples of cosmology. Okay, well, yeah, this is all we can, so the science, this is what we think of as science now. That's the limit of our knowledge of being able to perceive reality and describe it
directly, right?
Like, directly. Like, that's the limit. That's, so how, and there might be, there's a lot that goes into that. And, I realize that there's a lot, but it's still a limited thing. It's still a limit.
Right.
There's that aspect of it. And there's also my sci-fi mind can come up with other explanations for what these other Buddhas that existed in, as they existed in maybe an alternate dimensional realm of our Earth, or do you know what I mean? There's all kinds of things that, that I should say that as well. That's part of where my mind jumps around. Monkey mind, total monkey mind stuff. This, all of this really is that. Is my monkey mind playing with itself, basically. But that's what comes to my mind, is those kinds of things, rather than I guess I'm just not. I guess it's a matter of not being comfortable in that realm of to what extent true, or what way is this true? I can, when I break it down and I look at it, I'm like, okay, yeah, then I can see these things, and I talk about it, and I can say, yeah, okay. But that doesn't, in the end, it doesn't encourage me to look at Jodo Shinshu any more than any other school of Buddhism.
Mm.
See what I mean? Because pretty much you can apply the same thing to any other school of Buddhism. And it's like, well, then in that case, why is Jodo Shinshu more true than
Right.
other school?
Well,
Other teaching or another, do you see what I mean? Anyway.
yeah. I do.
So
I would say that.
here's my thing. Let me just say this one other thing. This is another thing about this that is a battle.
Sure. Yeah.
There, well, within
Please.
me, there's part of me that would like to go with that perspective that you've just said, to be able to do that. And also to just accept science, trust science more than I do. Do you know what I mean? Trust. There's part of me that would just like to say, to the extent that science even trusts itself, I'll go with that. Like this is the limit of our knowledge now, the limit of our technology now. This is the limit of our collective perception now. In a Buddhist framework, I would like to just it'd be so much easier. Do you know what I mean? Just to go with the flow. In that sense, that's one. And also to be able to go with the flow. And what you're talking about is. But I can't hold that to go to. Do you see what I mean? It's hard for me to then go. All right, I already don't believe. There's already part of me. I have so many doubts. It's like that increases the doubt. do you see what I mean? I already have so many doubts. If I go to that just adds more. It feels like it adds more. It seems like to me it would add more doubt to the mix, not less doubt. Do you see what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes,
you can ask me questions.
I do.
That I'm trying to explain, but
no. I do see where you're coming from. So please continue.
So that would just, part of me would just like to it almost like it would be a surrender to just don't question every single thing, and just don't and just don't distrust every single thing, and just go with it. Okay, this is what we have. It's like have you ever heard somebody say, something about when they talk about democracy? It's not really great, but it's the best thing we got.
Right. Yeah. Supposedly, I believe it was Winston Churchill who maybe said that.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. It was. Yeah. So there's part of me that's like, I wish I could have that perspective about all these things. Do you know what I mean? As far as the way that in science impacts, our thinking about the Dharma and the way that the skillful means aspect of Buddhism, aside from scientific worldview.
In the finger pointing at the moon aspect as well, right?
Yeah.
The language aspect. There's a lot going on here, right?
Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of loosening up of my mind to become more flexible to this. I mean, I guess that's part of the point of Buddhism in general, is to do that. But around these points, I just have very habituated stuff that is just that this goes to suspicious, black or it's this or that,
right.
That keeps me from being able to do that. And there's times where I can. There's times where I'm like, oh, and it's such a relief when for a moment, I can just rest there and just say, okay, this is.
Yeah.
And then something will happen in my life, or I'll remember something. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. Do you know, something will.
I know exactly what you mean, because I was there. I was where you are.
Yeah.
And I had the exact same, where I would kind of I would be thinking about the Dharma and history and science and all of these questions, and I would kind of reach this quiet spot where like it could all kind of just come. It seemed to kind of come together, and then my mind would fly off and do something else, and it would all just go back to the way it was.
Monkey mind, man. Oh, the monkey mind. It's a bear.
Yeah. But I would say the goal, if you're interested, right? The goal is to get to a point where you can be flexible and you can be in that place all the time, and you don't have to worry. You don't have to have these doubts. See, that is what doubt is when you set up this dichotomy, and the problem comes too when people set up a dichotomy between what they know and then what they think they're supposed to believe. And when those things are different, you end up with cognitive dissonance where you know one thing, on the one hand, I mean, because you know the earth revolves around the sun, for example, but then you're telling yourself, I have to believe this particular thing, so you end up with this cognitive dissonance, and it's doubt. It creates this restless, unable to relax and be flexible, state of mind, right? So I think
definitely a mind that I'm in most of the time.
So what's good is when we are discussing, like we are doing now, these questions, these issues, I'm kind of sharing my perspective, hoping that it's somewhat useful. But I think as we do this, I can predict that you will reach a point where that you can, come to that point where you will make sense of things for yourself, right? And that's another thing. Like, I'm telling you, like, well, this is how things make sense for me, but you may have a different way of making sense of things. So you have to find the way that makes sense for you, right? And it may be different from my path, right? Because we're all on a different journey. I mean, well, we're on the same journey because we're both Jodo Shinshu, Buddhists, but the identical, the individual path is, different for everyone, right? So I think we're nearing the end of the time, but let's just to wrap up. Has, like, from when we started, when you first asked this question, and then now that we discussed a little bit about it, and how do you feel? How do you feel about the question? Has it changed at all, or
it has a bit?
What do you think?
It has changed a bit, and I more clearly see what the issue is. With a lot of my doubt, with a lot of this is a big theme in my doubts. With a lot of what we've discussed. I mean, we've spent a lot of time with similar issues, and I kind of see a clearer picture of what, in my hazy monkey mind, bamboo, unenlightened way, I see a clearer picture of what the issue is, and it is that flexibility. Flexibility of being able to say, that mind state I'm in, and these dichotomies and that questioning and that tension itself is part of the problem. It's the topic of the problem. That's the problem. Do you see what I mean? It's
right.
Which is really kind of, that is everything. That's when it comes to our consciousness. That is the whole problem. The problem
Mm,
isn't the topic. The problem isn't what you this. It's the
mm,
your way your mind functions. That is the problem, or dysfunction,
right.
case may be, or is habituated. And anyway, so that part of it definitely, that has changed something. Something shifted there where I can see now the problem with all this whole category of doubt that
Mm,
we've probably talked about 4 sessions, and in every other session hit touched upon.
yeah,
Probably
because it's all connected,
in
right?
one way or another. Yeah. My it is this is the problem isn't, well, if it was 500 years ago, then what's, what I
Yeah,
mean? That's not the
yeah,
problem.
right.
Who's the problem is who's looking at the problem. The problem is
Exactly.
what
The
the
problem,
problem is what's looking at the problem, not the what you perceive as the problem. So
yeah,
that's kind of that's a big takeaway from this for me is, and it has to do with that flexibility of mind. Now, how much I can, be in that, is a whole nother.
yeah. But I would say what you just said about the way of looking at the problem is a huge breakthrough. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like if you realize that you're already 90% of the way there.
And you would think as a Buddhist, that would be the first thing you think of. Do you know what I mean? Like you would think
Yeah,
that should be an obvious thing to a Buddhist, but
right.
anyway,
But you
yeah.
also have to remember you and I are not, enlightened Buddhist masters to any degree
Practicing
of
on a daily
enlightenment. We're
mindfulness. Yeah, we're not doing. Yeah, true, true.
we're bamboo, right? So it's a
It's a different. Yeah, I
yeah,
think it's more of an educational approach to
exactly.
than a Satori approach.
Yeah. Well, that sounds good to me. And if if you would like, I mean, is this the extent to your question about
Yes, this is the
Papo
particulars.
and
It's the particulars actually are not that important to all these things where
okay,
science
yeah,
and science and the Dharma and science and the
right,
this is what it comes to. And that's what
okay,
it comes to, that
yeah,
inflexibility in my mind and that mind state, that distrusting, you know,
mm,
and having to have it resolved. Well, there's these two different things. I gotta, do you know what I mean? And
yeah,
but yet still not letting go of my perception of either side of it that I think is the side, or do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like not
right,
um and that question, this has been loosening it up too, is when we were discussing, when I discuss skillful means, when I discuss like this part of it where it's the meaning that's important, not the finger, it's the meaning, not the words, not the
mm,
language. Shakyamuni said it himself. When I discuss those things, when I discuss that the state, the precarious nature of our existence and even thinking, do you know what I mean? Well,
mm,
how can I be so inflexible if I know that that's the case? Do you see what I mean? And
mm,
that question,
yeah,
what way is this true? All those things over time have been kind of eating at this, or pointing at this sort of issue. And today, I think I got to what that main gist of it. It's my mind. It's the habit of my mind that's the issue, not the issue.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's the
I think
habituation
that's
of my mind and my mind state that's the
yeah,
issue. The issue, not the
yeah,
issue, not the subject of it. Not the
yeah.
anyway. Yeah,
Good. Well, I'm glad we were able to address that
yeah,
question. And if you'd like, for our next session, we can move on to the question about the transformed Peer
Yes.
Land and the borderlands and the Womb Palace and all of that stuff. So that would
It
make
comes
a
down
great.
to maybe I still have a chance that way.
Yeah. I know the direction that question is coming from. And there's a lot of passages that address that very doubt. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about it. I think it'll be a good. I'll do some preparation and kind of put together some of the texts that are relevant, and then we can have a conversation about that. So I've actually been wanting to discuss this topic because you did bring it up earlier, and I thought this is a really good topic. I mean, this is
Which one, the Borderland one or the?
Yeah, the borderland,
Okay,
the
cool.
transformed land and fulfilled land, and
Womb Palace, the 9 great lotuses,
land of insolence and pride.
I love that name, land of and what's the palace? Is it the womb palace? No, there's a palace. Isn't there another palace?
Yeah, I think there's the jeweled palace of pride or of sloth and
the best one is the insolence. What is it? The realm of insolence and pride.
And pride, I think. Yeah. There's different translations, but it's very good.
Yeah. So anyway, it's also tended to the same thing. So just to wrap up, it's also tended to.
Sorry, I'm really up against it.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, it was just it's also loosened up not just this aspect of things, our discussions. My tendency to either go into. It's also loosened up that sense of distrust in anything, whether it's science, politics, people. It's loosened that up, and it's or my default position of go to the traditional belief, go to the traditional interpretation, go to the more conservative side of things.
Yeah.
Whereas I know I have, like, when I look at, and that's like a whole nother thing that's divided me, because there's that side of it, the traditional default conservative kind of, we're default to that worldview, because I don't really trust that, but I trust that more than I distrust that less than I do other things. Whereas I see the skill and means interpretation of a lot of things, and I go, yeah, that fits with the modern world, and yes, that and it allows for all sorts of things that in Buddhist morality that look like, wait a second, well, yeah, of course, so it's good at the time that had to be, know what I mean? Again, it's loosened up all of that kind of stuff as well, our discussions in general, which has been really healthy for me.
Yes.
Because I spent a lot of time in that. I'll call that my own paradigm of paradigms of.
Yeah.
It's not a comfortable place, but anyway.
Yeah, it's not a healthy place, really.
No.
So the whole point of the Buddha Dharma, right, is to it's medicine for us, right? Yeah. So it's curing us. The cure is coming.
And it's definitely happening. The medicine of our discussions, of deep listening, of these Dharma discussions, that aspect of deep listening is definitely it's definitely there. It's definitely happening. So anyway, thank you so much. I really gotta go. It's Mother's Day.
All right.
So we're getting ready for
Okay, great. Enjoy.
So, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, sounds great. Yes, we'll meet again in the borderlands.
I'm picturing like a Western, spaghetti Western music in the background. Yeah,
tumbleweeds rolling across me.
But yet it's very beautiful, very nice at the same time. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you very much. Take care. Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu. Take care.